Greetings, curious one, and thank you for tuning into Renegade Files, your underground connection to paranormal adventures, explorations of strangeness, and deep dives into covert culture. I'm your host, Lex Gordon, reaching across the airwaves from the Jungle Villa outpost, deep in the uncharted tropics. This is Renegade Files episode 140, The Occult Side of Hollywood, Rituals, Hidden History, and Dark Magic. Hollywood has always sold transformation. Actors become other people. Stage sets become other worlds. Music, lighting, and costumes can change a room full of strangers into a crowd sharing the same emotions. And long before film and recorded music, magic ritual traditions use many of those same tools. Their costumes were robes, their lighting was candles, and the lines they recited were the invocations of carefully staged environments designed to change the very states of the people taking part. Those two worlds, the worlds of magic and Hollywood, would eventually merge. By the early 20th century, organized esoteric movements were physically present in Southern California. Aleister Crowley's followers established a lodge in Hollywood, others performed Thelemic rituals in Pasadena, and people like L. Ron Hubbard, Kenneth, and Anton LaVey directly influenced and in fact guided many of the pop culture elite. After that, Satanic and ceremonial magic entered rock music, movies, album covers, and stage shows. The all-too-real Manson murders poisoned the atmosphere of peace and love in the late 1960s counterculture, and the 80s gave us backwards record playing, the Satanic Panic, and Tipper Gore censorship battles over music. By the 21st century, eyes, pyramids, demons, and witchcraft had become ordinary tools in mainstream pop productions. Then the story gets messy. Some artists truly practice the occult. Some borrow imagery because it looks cool. Others use it because shock sells. And conspiracy culture builds it all into theories of repetition, the Illuminati, mass ritual, monarch programming, and hidden elites using entertainment as control. This episode is enormous because we will dive very deep into an investigation of this whole continuum. I'm bringing the receipts with dates, people, places, films, albums, performances, and documented relationships. But in Hollywood, the line between reality and mythology is never clear. So muster up your bravery and follow me down into the most twisted rabbit hole, because on this one, we gotta use the buddy system. On this one, we go deep together. Come with me now into Renegade Files episode 140, The Occult Side of Hollywood, Rituals, Hidden History, and Dark Magic. Dark Magic. Dark Magic. You can find all things Renegade Files at therenegadefiles.com. It's your one-stop shop for merchandise, bonus episodes, the RFA agency on Patreon, and more. Just visit therenegadefiles.com. The Hidden History. Before Hollywood, there was an occult system that entertainment would inherit. This started way back with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in London around 1888. It was a British initiatory secret society devoted to ceremonial magic and Western esotericism. It practiced Hermeticism, astrology, alchemy, tarot, magical invocations. It favored Egyptian symbolism, elemental magic, and graded initiation ceremonies. Several members were already cultural figures, including the poet W.B. Yeats, writer Arthur McKen, occult author A.E. Waite, and eventually Aleister Crowley. Much of the imagery now casually called occult in movies we see and music videos and album art didn't originate with modern entertainers, but with this older initiatory society, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Things like ceremonial robes and pentagrams and magical weapons, the actual ritual circle, all of the Egyptian gods and planetary correspondence, initiation of ritual and death ceremonies, all of that already belonged to this esoteric society. The Western and more modern movements just picked up where they left off, or basically copied what they did. The Golden Dawn gave us Crowley, who brought Thelema. This leads to Kenneth Anger, the underground film culture, modern entertainment, occultism. We don't want to get ahead too far too fast, but the point is, from the very beginning, all of this sort of came connected. So Aleister Crowley was born in 1875 and lived until 1947. He was an English ceremonial magician and occultist. He developed Thelema after his 1904 stay in Cairo, Egypt, where I believe he spent the night inside the Great Pyramid. Crowley claimed that during that night, a beyond human intelligence that he called Aiwass, Aiwass, dictated to him the Book of the Law. This is a central Thelemic formulation, and its most famous catchphrase is, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Beyond that, he also said, "Love is the law, love under will," and he said a lot. Crowley taught that an individual should discover and accomplish his or her true will, rather than simply indulge every desire. Now, this gets a little complicated, because what if your every desire is your true will? And it goes off the rails pretty quickly. But it can also be super powerful for someone who is dedicated and disciplined. There's a few other major Crowley concepts that I want to explain. One is magic, spelled with a K. Crowley deliberately uses the K spelling to separate what he does from stage magic, pulling a rabbit out of a hat, that sort of thing. He's talking about the old concept of being one with the universe and affecting a change through application of will and belief and that sort of motion. Another thing that's identified with him is the Great Beast 666. This identity is something that I think his mother called him the Great Beast, because he was so hard to deal with when he was a kid, and it became an identity that he deliberately embraced and cultivated. Another term we hear from him is the Aeon of Horus. Crowley believed that humanity was entering a new spiritual age, this emphasizing the individual will that he was so bent on promoting or championing, and the Aeon of Horus was his sort of name for this new age. Another thing that he was big into was sex magic, sexual acts incorporated into ceremonial magic for their power. This isn't something new, it's not something he invented, and it certainly didn't stop with him, but it's interesting that he's so aligned with those ideas. Another term that we hear from him is Babylon. This is a major feminine figure within the Thelemic cosmology. Crowley died in Hastings, England, December 1st, 1947, and his physical life ended there. But his entertainment career had just gotten started. He continues to live through popular culture and his influence even to this day. So the way that we're going to do this episode is we're going to go through these parts and the people that influence. So the first part is the sort of pre-Hollywood, where does the occult, at least modern version of the occult in America, come from? And I want to also be clear that occult doesn't always mean negative. Occult literally means hidden. So this is areas of hidden knowledge that the general public don't know, or the common everyday school doesn't teach. These are things that are old knowledge, old traditions, and a sort of modern spin on them, if we could call the 50s modern. So that's where this sort of lands, or where it begins, rather. I think that it's important to go over who those key players are. We're not going to give exhaustive accounts of every single person involved, but that little sample of who Crowley was gives you an idea of the depth that we're going to go into, so that we know who the players are that sort of set the stage for what would become occult Hollywood. So Crowley appears in mass entertainment almost right away. I think, when was it that he died again? 47. So maybe not right away, but the point is, in popular culture, and it could be argued, as popular culture even became a thing. We have to remember that before the 50s and 60s, widespread sales of records were really not a thing, as the kids say. That a lot of records were actually, as far as popular media goes, a lot of that sort of media, popular records, were recorded at radio stations and distributed locally, played on the radio station that recorded it, or other radio stations that radio station's company owned, and records would be traded and moved around in a very primitive way compared to like our modern distribution of pop culture media. So there's that to remember. So basically, as soon as we develop these widespread, or the developing production of widespread media started to grow to a wider audience, right away we have these occult influences showing up. A perfect example is the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Crowley's photograph appears on that album cover. This was cover collage made by Peter Blake and Jan Hayworth, and they assembled a bunch of historical and cultural figures, and Crowley was one of them. And at the time, people made a big deal about that because he was sort of seen as this, not necessarily a villain, but an occult character, to say the least. So that album was released in May of '67. It's not really evidence that the Beatles practiced Thelema, but it is evidence that 20 years after Crowley's death, his image was popular enough to be, or at least arguably, on the cover of one of the biggest albums ever. Crowley had sort of become this occult subculture figure right away when mainstream iconography began to pull from the occult. We also have David Bowie's album, Quicksand, 1971. There's this, or I think that's maybe the song, I'm not sure, maybe the album was Hunky Dory. Bowie explains that he was closer to the Golden Dawn. He refers directly to Crowley in some of his works, and it's really not an interpretation, but it is sort of an observation, let's just call it. So by the 70s, Bowie's interest became considerably darker. He got into a lot of drugs when he was in Los Angeles. He became intensely preoccupied with occultism, Kabbalah, magic, fears of supernatural attack, which is maybe sort of the drug-induced paranoia that goes with that. Accounts describe him as constantly setting up black candles and protective circles and doing occult rituals. Also hallucinations. So this is like hardcore sort of 70s LA scene where you throw a bunch of money and a bunch of paranoia into the occult mix. What could go wrong? So Bowie provides two different examples. 1971, occultism deliberately incorporated into his entertainment products, and then in the mid-70s, his occult ideas entering the entertainer's personal worldview. So that's sort of a unique, or maybe it's one of the original novel instances of that, at least that we know about. And I want to pause here because it may seem that this episode has no structure because I'm just rambling through some of this right away. The point is, it does have structure. It's a big wide mess, but we're going to go through it together. And what we're doing here is just going through the personalities that would become important. Then this sort of leads into and the other side of this is that these are people influenced by Aleister Crowley. He's just one of the first characters that we're talking about when we talk about how did we get to this point where we are now, where the occult seems to be dripping out of everything that Hollywood does. It started back in these days. Crowley, a huge influence on that. These are the people that he touched in a certain way, not like that. So the first was Jimmy Page, or the second or third, I guess. Jimmy Page, so from Led Zeppelin, as you know. Page didn't merely reference Crowley in a song. He sort of became a serious collector of Aleister Crowley material. He actually bought the Boleskine house in Loch Ness, Scotland. So that was a house that Crowley had actually built and lived at, or bought and lived at. It was an isolated property. It was on Loch Ness in Scotland, where we know the Loch Ness Monster may or may not reside, but that is the lake. And it's this very sort of windswept, cold, damp house where Crowley set up shop to perform a very lengthy ceremonial magic working that was known as Abramelin Magical Operation. This was his plan to establish contact with his own holy guardian angel, would be one way to put it. There's 100 interpretations as to what he was getting up to there. Some people say conjuring demons. Other people say trying to get in touch with his holy guardian angel. Arguably, it depends on who you ask. Jimmy Page bought that house in 1970. Very interesting. He later specifically acknowledged that Crowley's connection to the property was part of his attraction to it, noting that Crowley had constructed his own temple there. So Jimmy Page, being such a fan of Aleister Crowley, that was his brush with greatness, I guess you could say. Page also owned an occult bookstore and small publishing operation in London, and it was called the Equinox Booksellers and Publishers. This is named after Crowley's The Equinox work. So then Led Zeppelin as a whole, instead of, beyond the individual band members, their names appear as symbols on the album that's commonly referred to as Zoso. That's the one that's got those weird little sigils at the bottom. This has generated decades of occult speculation. The exact meaning of those symbols is never been fully authoritatively explained by the band members, but there are claims that it definitely means Satan, 666, etc. That doesn't mean that they're right, and so we can't really take that as established fact. The fact that Page was interested in Crowley, absolutely documented, and even going so far as buying a piece of his property that Crowley owned. This brings us to Ozzy Osbourne, who maybe wasn't so veiled in his sort of production or his love of Crowley. On the album Blizzard of Oz, we get the song Mr. Crowley. That was 1980. It's not speculative symbolism, really. It's just sort of an ode to Aleister Crowley. The song directly invokes Crowley's reputation as this occult magician and a historical figure of note. And Crowley's identity at this point fully cemented into the world of rock and roll. So at this point, we want to take a little step back and look at some of the occultism that started early on physically in Hollywood, something called Crotona. This is a theosophical society established as an actual spiritual community. It was in the Hollywood Hills and established in 1912, the area called Beechwood Canyon. It became the headquarters of the American Theosophical Society from 1912 to 1920. So theosophy is that Helena Blavatsky character who was very big on spiritualism in the late 19th century. This sort of swept across America. Remember, pre-internet, one newspaper read in every town, even little bit of sort of mass media, but not like we imagine it today. This was Eastern and Western religious synthesis. So things like karma, reincarnation, spiritual evolution. There's this idea of the hidden masters, what the theosophy called the Mahatmas. This draws from ancient wisdom traditions, and it mixes in modern, or at the time, modern clairvoyance, their own esoteric knowledge and dictionaries and teachings and workings that they did. So this was a place, actually, Crotona, that they set up as their own little Thelema town, I guess, or commune. California is always big on communes, aren't they? In the 1910s, we have to remember, as this was going on, Hollywood is at the time emerging as America's filmmaking center. All of this sort of coincides. It's just interesting to notice the timing of it. That's all. Crowley's organization also sets up in Hollywood. A little bit after this, in 1935, he sets up a lodge in Hollywood. Wilfred Talbot Smith established the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO, in Hollywood in association with Smith. This was on Winona Boulevard in Hollywood, Thelemic study. And there's a whole thread you could go down because of the falling out of the people involved there. Crowley did or didn't like them, and they all got into fights, and it was just a bunch of drama for quite a bit, and they end up splintering up into different groups. That's a whole nother show. But there's a lot of entertainment industry connection right away. One particularly interesting connection is with Jane Wolfe. Jane Wolfe, I know this is going way back, but she was a silent film actress. She was the big shot of the silent film era, like the harlot, let's just say, the big star. She appears in dozens of films before getting deeply involved in Thelema. So she traveled to Crowley's Abbey of Thelema in Sicily. This was in 1920. She studied directly with him there, later became involved with the OTO that we were just mentioning. And so here we have a literal Hollywood star and with a direct connection to Crowley, traveling, studying with him in Sicily, coming back and bringing arguably what she learned with her. This is a silent film actress, so the very early days of Hollywood, and she was completely into Crowley's ideas of magic. This is slow building, but it's important to catch all of it. So Jack Parsons, we talked about him before. Jack Parsons is the rocket scientist who becomes friends with Crowley. His full name was John Whiteside Parsons. He was known as Jack. He's a rocket engineer and pioneering propulsion researcher associated with establishing the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. That's the JPL, a huge part of space exploration to this day. And he was deeply into the occult, and he was friends with Crowley, and he did all these crazy experiments and rituals and all of that out in the desert in California, mostly Pasadena, until he blew himself up with a rocket. So Parsons and his wife Helen joined the OTO in 1939. He corresponded often with Crowley and rose rapidly within American Thelema. So he was, for a while, the sort of hand-picked Crowley's man in America by many accounts. By 1942, Parsons became the leader of the lodge at 1003 South Orange Grove Avenue. That's Pasadena, California. This was in 1942. Yeah. He moved the operations into a large mansion, and that became a sort of unconventional, unofficial community environment of Thelema at the time. Sort of a weird mixture of scientists and artists and writers and occultists and hippies, what you could call bohemians at the time, and like science fiction writers, and just this sort of what you may look back on in hindsight and call futurists, people at the time who were just fascinated with what are we going to do in the future, rocket engineers, sci-fi writers, occultists, and all these artists that sort of move through there. I don't really know. There's not super detailed records of about exactly who came through there. So that being the nature of a secret society. So we also don't really know how large of an organization, but at a certain point, we could easily say hundreds of people were involved, and maybe even thousands, with hundreds sort of moving through there in a given month or so. Let's just say it's hard to pin down. Actually, the police and the FBI investigated the group because of allegations of black magic. I don't know if this was a time when if you called the police, like, ring, hello, police department. Yeah, the guys down there at this house in Pasadena are doing black magic, and the police would have been like, all right, thanks for the call, we're on the case. But anyway, they did, for whatever reason. They didn't really find anything that was illegal, let's just say. So that's sort of a side note to history, fascinating as it is. You can dive deeper into this specific part of occult history in Renegade Files episode 54, Occult Magic in Modern Science. We go deep into Jack Parsons because it gets into NASA and the JPL in that episode. So that's episode 54, Occult Magic and Modern Science. Check it out. Or if you already listened to it and remember liking it, share it with a friend. All you got to do is send them to therenegadefiles.com and refer them to look in the episode archive for Renegade Files episode 54, Occult Magic and Modern Science. Thank you. Now, this brings us into the whole Pasadena area and the Mojave region and Jack Parsons and his connections to Crowley land us into something that's known as the Babylon Working. This is an actual series of ceremonial magical workings performed by Parson and some of his pals. You could almost call it a workshop, let's just say, because it wasn't just one night. It was an ongoing process. Parsons attempted through what's called the Babylon Working to invoke or manifest the Thelemic feminine archetype divinity known as Babylon. In no uncertain terms, and this is documents that we have and we can read that he laid out what his plans were. He was absolutely trying to manifest a physical goddess on the earth. His ritual partner during the initial workings was L. Ron Hubbard. That's right, the founder of Scientology. So these are the people that are shooting rockets off in the desert and trying to conjure goddesses right in Hollywood's backyard. Hubbard sort of acted as Parsons', let's just say, what's the word, like note taker. Maybe that's like it, he might be offended by that lowly of a title, but essentially that's what he was. He was the record keeper of the whole thing. Parsons believed that the rituals resulted in the arrival of someone named Marjorie Cameron, who he interpreted as this elemental, this sort of goddess, and she was referred to as the Scarlet Woman. He believed that he had summoned her, and Marjorie Cameron was a real person. Parsons and Cameron... Now, let me just look one place because I want to get this right. Man, okay. This gets really intertwined. So I'm going to go through some of the documentation on Marjorie Cameron. I had thought that she was maybe dated or was married to L. Ron Hubbard also. But anyway, possibly. She was in the mix, let's just say. So she was a real person. She was born 1922. She died 1995. She professionally used the mononym Cameron. So she just went by her one name, which was her last name. Was her stage name, Marjorie Cameron. It's interesting. So she was ahead of the curve on that. Because she appears here in my notes, and because I remember her as being of some importance, I want to look really quickly into it, so I did, and oh yes, I was right. I'm glad I did. Let's just take a little side quest and check her out, who she was. So this is a lady that Jack Parsons believed was this goddess that he had conjured. So he does this magical thing in the desert between shooting off rockets in the desert, and he says, I want to conjure this Scarlet Woman, this goddess, and then he runs into an actress named Marjorie Cameron, and he's like, oh my gosh, there she is. I did it. Eureka. So she was born in Iowa. She volunteered for the U.S. Navy during the Second World War. After that, she settled in Pasadena, California, where she met Parsons, who believed her to be the elemental woman that he had invoked in the early stages of a series of sex magic rituals called the Babylon Working. So here we are. They entered into a relationship, and then things went south, and he died. And she established a multiracial occult group called the Children, which dedicated itself to sex magic rituals with the intent of producing mixed race moon children. These would be devoted to the god of Horus. The group soon dissolved, largely because many of its members became concerned by Cameron's increasingly apocalyptic predictions. So what does she do? She goes back to LA, back to Hollywood, establishes herself within the avant-garde artistic community. She becomes friends with Curtis Harrington and also Kenneth Anger, a very interesting personality that we'll get to in depth later. She appeared in 2 of Harrington's films, and She appeared in Anger's film Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome. In later years, she made appearances in films by John Chamberlain and Chick Strand. She rarely remained in one place for very long. She lived in Joshua Tree, San Francisco, some other places. She gave birth to a daughter, Crystal Eve, although intermittent health problems prevented her from working, and there was something else. Anyway, so she's in the mix with all of this, sort of a femme fatale character who's very mysterious and who Jack Parsons believed to be the Scarlet Woman, this goddess of Babylon that he had conjured in a sex magic ritual. Great fun. So Parsons later produced Liber 49, the Book of Babylon, which he believed represented a supernatural communication that continued Crowley's Book of the Law. It is said, though, that Crowley himself was very skeptical about what Parson was doing at this point, and the two of them sort of became estranged. The woman, Cameron, blended into Hollywood's avant-garde art scene. Her connections and her later life and her mixing it up with Kenneth Anger leads us to the next part, which is Kenneth Anger, where occult ritual becomes film. So Kenneth Anger was born in 1927. He lived until 2023, an experimental American filmmaker. He was a committed student of Crowley's ideas. He was the author of a book called Hollywood Babylon, very scandalous book. Anger's importance isn't really that he put occult imagery into his films, but that he conceived of cinema itself as magical. So his filmmaking drew explicitly upon Crowley's concept of magic, so not stage magic, but magic as a force of change in the world. And his films are both depicting of ritual and functioning as ritualistic acts in and of themselves. So these things are meant to affect the viewer. If you've ever seen any of his movies, Lucifer Rising, another one. We talked about Lucifer Rising in I think episode 7, the Laurel Canyon conspiracy theory, which is absolutely a must listen to Renegade Files episode. Go back and check it out, because we have a lot of connections there with Kenneth Anger. His head rears into that scene quite a bit. Then we have Kenneth Anger's experimental film, Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome. This is the one that the Scarlet Lady appears in. I think I have it in these notes here too. The title comes from Coleridge. The film presents a gathering of mythological, magical, and archetypal personalities, characters, persons, including figures associated with the goddess Shiva, Kali, Pan, Astarte, Lilith, who is sort of said to be partly represented by the Starbucks logo. I don't know if that's true or not. Isis is in there, and Osiris. So the concept revolves around transformation, magical identities, and a ritualistic gathering. Now, I will say that description is way more clear than actually what you get as you consume the film. It's a task. So anyway, it does tie Marjorie Cameron and Jack Parsons into Hollywood directly, especially in this early kind of creepy occult experimental film way with the work of Kenneth Anger. So another thing that we have, another film by Kenneth Anger, is called Invocation of My Demon Brother. This was in 1969. It's approximately 11 to 12 minutes long, so it's between 11 and 12 minutes long. So it's interesting because it's just pure occult content, but it seems to be Kenneth Anger conducting a ritual. So we see pentagrams, magical imagery, ritual material intercut with counterculture imagery. Kenneth Anger identified the material in the film with Crowley-derived ceremonial practice. So this is something that he sort of alluded to, perhaps in interviews or in articles. Kenneth Anger uses color, repetition, symbolism, and editing, and the whole thing is conceived as a ritual magical working. It's not just a little movie. It has an agenda behind it. If you want to watch Invocation of My Demon Brother, you can find it online. I'll put a link to it in the Dark Intel files on Patreon if I can find a clean one, if you so dare. proceed with caution. This is not an endorsement of Kenneth Anger by any stretch. So that sort of sets the tone, or at least Hollywood and its occult history kind of comes out swinging with Kenneth Anger. Leads us to Anton LaVey. He's the founder of the Church of Satan, and he actually appears in the Invocation of My Demon Brother film by Kenneth Anger in 1969, if we can call it a film. So Anton LaVey actually founded and organized the Satanic Church of Satan in California, practicing an actual ritual in the film. And he also, there's a few other characters that appear in this short film. So this is the first sort of entrance into Hollywood popular recognition of Anton LaVey, it could be said. Any widespread distribution of who he is appearing in this Kenneth Anger film. Also in the film, another nefarious character, Bobby Beausoleil. He's a musician and an actor, and he's friends with Kenneth Anger, but he eventually goes on to become a Manson follower, and he gets convicted of murder. He murders a man right before the big Manson project. So he's sort of a side note, but he did get convicted of murder, and he went to jail for it, Bobby Beausoleil. And then his name comes up again because he gets connected into some occult business down the road. We also have Mick Jagger involved in the project because he created the soundtrack, I think most of it made with the Moog synthesizer. The Rolling Stones frontman, therefore not merely an associate of Kenneth Anger, which we know he was, he's working with him. So they're doing projects together, at least at that point. There's a very famous photograph of Mick Jagger that was taken at a party where he's standing next to Kenneth Anger. And the film incorporates footage that was associated with the Rolling Stones' 1969 Hyde Park concert. That's some of the sort of fringe culture footage that we mentioned that is intercut into the film. This was Hollywood's sort of first glance at who Kenneth Anger was and what he was about, and this little grainy 12-minute film, basically, which is an occult satanic ritual mixed in with some concert footage and some hippies coming in and out. It got attention because of the people who were in it. And I think that says a lot about the reach and power and influence of Kenneth Anger. He was connected. Let's just put it that way. So then he moves on to produce, or he starts to work on for a very long time, a movie called Lucifer Rising. This was conceived of in the 60s. It was initially filming started in the 70s, and it wasn't really completed until 1980. So that's a long time to work on something. But there's a reason for that, because some of the people that were his cohorts ended up in jail for murder. And that kind of tends to slow production down. So Lucifer in Anger's universe isn't really only the Christian devil, or isn't at all, I guess you could say. This is the Lucifer who's like the light bringer, illumination, the rebel, with a sort of bringing to the masses a new spiritual age. It wasn't all about darkness and negativity and hate. It was about knowledge that had been suppressed, but it does always seem to be wrapped in this spookiness. There's no doubt about that. A lot of people say that this film is influenced heavily by Crowley's Aeon of Horus. We mentioned that earlier. That's sort of this new dawn kind of idea of a spiritual, mental, magical awakening for not necessarily the masses in Crowley's case, but for the initiates. This movie combines imagery of Egyptian gods, ceremonial magic, magical symbolism, ritual, ancient sacred locations. These are all Thelemic concepts also. And in the film, we see Egypt, we see Stonehenge. The structure of it is designed around magical transformation. It's not really a conventional narrative. We have Marianne Faithfull, who appears in the movie as Lilith. So Marianne Faithfull was a singer. She was associated with the Rolling Stones, maybe singing backup on some tracks, that sort of thing. Jimmy Page produced the soundtrack. At least, well, he was initially approach to do it, and I think he was going to. He did record some music for it, but I think him and Kenneth Anger ultimately didn't agree on what they were trying to do musically for the film, so that didn't work out. I'm not sure if some of that music in the movie was Page's contribution. It's interesting, though. Page had already made it known that he was obsessed with Crowley. He owned Crowley's house, or one of his houses, and Kenneth Anger, being heavily influenced by Crowley as well. The two of them just didn't see eye to eye, I guess. But it gets crazier, and we did touch on some of this in the Laurel Canyon conspiracy episode. I urge you to go back and watch that. It's one of my favorites. It is, I think, at this point, the most downloaded and played Renegade Files episode, and I'm so glad about that because I'm really proud of it. So go check it out. But it leads us into the character which we mentioned briefly, Bobby Beausoleil. So after Anger and Page had, I'm really not sure if it was a falling out, or all I do know is that Page didn't do the all of the music that Beausoleil wanted him to for the movie because they couldn't agree. So Anger goes back to his old buddy Bobby Beausoleil, who eventually composed and recorded and released the soundtrack for Lucifer Rising. That's the Kenneth Anger movie. But the interesting thing is he recorded it while he was in prison. He made a band while he was in prison. He was in there serving a life sentence for murdering Gary Hinman. So that was an actor that was killed in 1969 by Bobby Beausoleil when he was a member of the Manson family. And this sort of preceded the Tate LaBianca killings. Okay. Now, that's a lot. That's a lot to go over, and we're just getting started. I told you this was a big one. There's a lot happening here. So what we have, let's just wrap that up so we can all be on the same page before we move on. We have the Golden Dawn. This is 1888. This is British occultism. Aleister Crowley joins that in 1898. He eventually creates his own version of it called Thelema. He splits. That becomes this OTO/Thelemic system. And then once again, Trouble in Paradise. And those two things sort of go their separate way a few times. And they develop chapters here and there. Crowley managing things as he travels the world, appointing sort of generals at this or that location. Jack Parsons becomes one of those. That's in 1939. He does this whole Babylon working thing. L. Ron Hubbard joins the chat. They're doing magic in the desert, and their goal is to conjure some woman, a goddess. And I guess that Jack Parsons runs into this actress named Marjorie Cameron at some point and believes that she is the goddess that he was trying to conjure. Now, knowing what we know about Marjorie Cameron, she probably ate that up. Don't you think? Yes, she's an avant-garde artist. She's mixing it up with the weird crowd. She's into the heavy, deep, witchy stuff. And then some rocket scientist comes along and says, "You're the goddess I conjured." And she's like, "Why, yes, where have you been?" So then she eventually makes her way into the circle with Kenneth Anger, becomes part of his occult cinema in the 50s and beyond. And so that's sort of the genesis of the occult in Hollywood. Good. So then we have Crowley posthumously, in a lot of cases, having great influence on the Beatles, Jimmy Page, David Bowie, Ozzy Osbourne, a long list, the Stones, a bunch of them. Then we have Kenneth Anger making a couple movies, and his circle includes Anton LaVey, Bobby Beausoleil, Mick Jagger, and a long list of other ones. Marianne Faithfull, she was a Mick Jagger sort of associate. And in the midst of, or at the sort of culmination of all of this, is the disastrous, murderous exploits of Gary Hinman getting killed by Bobby Beausoleil and Charlie Manson, not him, but the Manson family doing what they did. And all of that is just sort of the wave of chaos crashing on the shores of Hollywood, to poetically put it. So that's the situation. So this leads us into part 2, which is a more deep dive into the Satanist, murderous Hollywood underground. and I know you can't wait, just like me. So we're about to get into the darkness. And you can find all the Renegade Files that you want at therenegadefiles.com. It's your one-stop shop for merchandise, bonus episodes, the RFA agency on Patreon, which you can join to help me keep making these episodes. I would really appreciate it, and thanks to the people who are there already. Just visit therenegadefiles.com. Oh boy, here we go. Part 2. Satan, Murder, and the Hollywood Underground. First of all, Anton LaVey, he brings with us this whole idea of Satanism becoming entertainment. As crazy as it sounds, but not so crazy nowadays, right? Anton Sansador LaVey, born 1930, died 1997, San Francisco, California. He developed a public persona that combined occult philosophy, theatrical ritual, carnivalesque showmanship, blatant sexuality, horror imagery, and deliberate provocation. Before formally establishing the Church of Satan, he held gatherings at his home in San Francisco, and those became known as the Magic Circle, where people would come together, talk about magic, occultism, ritual, philosophy, and the supernatural, have some hors d'oeuvres, have some wine, and generally get up to weirdness. All good fun. Then he starts the Church of Satan. This was April 30th, 1966, and this was founded at 6114 California Street, San Francisco. This is a very famous house. He painted it black. It was later called the Black House. A lot of what he did was associated with European folklore, witches, supernatural activity, that sort of thing. He always made a distinction, though. He generally didn't teach worship of a literal supernatural Satan. This becomes very, I guess it's just you're splitting hairs at a certain point, but he did go over and over out of his way to say that Satan for him functions primarily as a symbol of individuality, rebellion, pride, opposition to conventional religion. That the movement was all about that, not necessarily about a love for the Christian Satan. So take from that what you will, but that was his position. LaVey intentionally surrounded that philosophy with a very visual and ceremonial language that was made up of nothing but Satanism. So it's kind of hard to believe what the guy says. I don't know. It's not that I don't. It's a complicated situation. You know, you have the whole Satan is the light bringer. His mechanism is pride, and having pride, maybe not the worst thing. And there's a million versions of you do you in the world that maybe flies in the face of traditional religions, and it seems like, at least according to him, if you asked him, that was his answer all the time. But then he goes about building this entire visual repertoire of all the trappings of what we would look at and then immediately say Satanism. You don't have to be a religious scholar to look at anything that Anton LaVey ever did and say, wow, he's a Satanist. Doesn't take a rocket scientist. No offense to Jack Parsons. So what kinds of things am I talking about as far as that symbolism goes? The black robes, the pentagrams, Baphomet, that's the goat, we all know. Altars with nude people on it, black candles, all of this inversions of Christian ritual, upside down crosses, running around saying Hail Satan all the time. So this is simultaneously religious ritual, but it's also, in a lot of ways, much more theatrical spectacle. It's sort of a media event. These things are very visual, they're very dramatic, they're made to be shocking. It's almost performance art that he's perpetrating whenever you get a glimpse of him doing whatever he's up to. So this is where we get this first idea of satanic ritual becoming a media product. See where we're going here? So thanks for sticking with me. I told you it's going to be a long road, but it's going to pay off. This is how we get here. We can't just open the book right to, hey, satanic ritual is a media product. You got to go through. You got to go down the path to get to the waterfall. I don't know. That's madness, but let's keep trucking. So yes, it's the first instance of that, this deliberate satanic ritual as a media event. So he has a wedding in San Francisco. This was in February 1st, 1967. And like your nerd friends had a Star Wars wedding, well, Anton LaVey had, guess what? A satanic wedding. He performed a very highly publicized ceremony where I don't think it was him that got married. It was John Raymond and Judith Case. They were the ones. He performed the wedding ceremony. So that ceremony was conducted at his famous Black House. He invited reporters and photographers. The event featured LaVey in his horned ceremonial headgear, and the altar where they performed the ceremony on was actually a nude woman where they put all the stuff on top of her. Approximately 50 reporters attended. Photographs appeared widely in the press. The LA Times ran the event on the front page, I think. LaVey had figured out how to turn this occult ritual into a mass media spectacle. And so that was a lot of publicity for you and your little satanic church, believe it. He was a publicity hound. He had a gift of converting that into paid followers. And at the same time, he's no dummy. Look where he sets up. He's in San Fran. He's courting the sort of entertainment elite. And I'm not saying this is the only reason, but a little bonus and benefit comes with that. They have a ton of money. So make of that what you will. Who would put it past him? So this whole satanic wedding was a big thing. And it was, let's go back, I want to get the date right, February 1st, 1967. So it made a huge splash. I think he wanted to capitalize on the momentum of that, so he followed it up with the satanic baptism. This was also 1967. This was for his daughter, Xena. We talked about her in the cloning episode because she looks suspiciously like Taylor Swift. Not saying that Taylor's a clone of Xena. They do look a lot alike, borderline twins. So that being neither here nor there, Anton LaVey does basically what he did for the satanic wedding when he baptizes his daughter in a satanic baptism. The ritual was recorded. Portions of it were released on LaVey's Satanic Mass album, I guess the audio from it. So this puts the Church of Satan as an actual ceremonial creator of material. And this transforms what they're doing into these commercially available recorded products, into videos, into news reports. And if you were there at the time, you might remember this is early sort of television becoming a huge vehicle. So he was on every talk show, and he's getting booed from one side and cheered from the other, and just the crazy chaos that the guy cultivated and he also loved. He fed right into it, and he sort of leveraged it. He capitalized on it. Now, a few other things that we're going to get into here. We're going to take a few steps back. So then, because we have this idea of Hollywood elite mixing it up with LaVey, one of those being Jane Mansfield, famous actress. Most people know the name. She was born in 1933. She died in 1967. She was one of the most famous blonde bombshells of the 50s and early 60s. People who don't know may see a picture of her and think it's Marilyn Monroe. But she was that kind of style, sort of blonde bombshell in the 50s. Jane Mansfield, arguably the original. She had films such as This Girl Can't Help It, 1956. She was a big shot. In 1966, she met Anton LaVey. Now, there's photographs that we have of Jane Mansfield and Anton LaVey together, including some very highly theatrical images of LaVey wearing his full-on devil horn costume with Jane Mansfield. So you have to understand what a scandal that was at the time in 1966 or in the late 60s. Jane Mansfield never had like a squeaky clean image, but seeing her with the king of the Satan Church and his horns still shocks middle America. So Mansfield, she leaned into it. She publicly associated herself with Anton LaVey, and even the Church of Satan, she didn't back away from it at all. She was like, come at me, bro. LaVey later claimed that she had become a high priestess, although the extent of her actual religious commitment is often disputed by other members in the Church of Satan. Now we start to get into some of the little weird, maybe bad things that come with this. So there's something that goes around Hollywood. It's known as the Sam Brody curse. Now, Sam Brody was Jane Mansfield's attorney, but he was also her boyfriend, at least for a while. And it is kind of said that he did not like Anton LaVey. LaVey later claimed that after an altercation between the two, that he placed a curse on Brody, and he warned Jane Mansfield to stay away from him. And then, on June 29, 1967, Jane Mansfield and her boyfriend Brody, who was also her lawyer, and their driver Ronnie Harrison were killed when their car struck the rear of a trailer near Slidell, Louisiana, and everyone immediately said the LaVey curse is part of that. That's what happened. He got him, kind of thing. This became part of satanic Hollywood folklore from then till now. There's no evidence that anything supernatural caused the car crash, but the timing of it just couldn't be ignored, especially for people who point things like that out. Whether or not the car crash was caused by LaVey's curse, we'll never know. But it definitely permanently attached the idea of Satanism and something tragic with Hollywood celebrity culture. From there, we're going to move into something that you may not have known, and it might be a surprise to you. It was to me in doing the research, and that is Sammy Davis Jr. and the Church of Satan. Oh no, not Sammy too. Another major entertainment figure, Sammy Davis Jr., became publicly associated with Anton LaVey. He was a member of the Rat Pack, so these Las Vegas superstars. Davis became apparently, that's Sammy Davis Jr., fascinated by Anton LaVey and Satanism during the late 1960s and the early 70s, and he started attending the Church of Satan events. Now, accounts differ over precisely how formally he was involved in the church, but one of America's biggest mainstream entertainers, publicly socializing with one of, if not the most famous Satanist in America. Davis later incorporated the devil and Satan into some of his entertainment personality. In 1973, he did a television pilot called Poor Devil, in which Sammy Davis Jr. actually played a demon trying to earn a promotion from Satan. It's kind of weird. So that was more of a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing, but it's interesting when you know the backstory of Sammy Davis Jr. being so infatuated, allegedly, with Anton LaVey and being a member of the Church of Satan. Who knew? So this leads us to another, something that always shows up in these sort of looks into Hollywood occultism, and that is the 1968 film Rosemary's Baby. So this was a novel. It was written in 1967 by Ira Levine. The film made a year later by Roman Polanski. Right away, the connections start to pile up, don't they? So this movie starred Mia Farrow, John Cassavetes, and Ruth Gordon. The story is about a young Manhattan woman whose neighbors are secretly members of a satanic coven and who ultimately discover that she has been impregnated with Satan's child, or that's what they believe. So it was released in June of 1968. It was a huge critical and commercial success, and Anton LaVey played Satan in the impregnation scene and served as a technical advisor on the movie. Anton LaVey promoted the version of this story, and I guess because the situation was, it was shot in such a way that you couldn't see exactly who was doing what, that being the sort of dancing around the censors in 1968. So Anton LaVey always says, yeah, that was me. Now, historians and later researchers maybe take issue with that, and there's some reliable production documentation that doesn't include Anton LaVey. Let's just say he's not listed in the credits, in other words. But it does seem that Rosemary's Baby and the whole satanic coven occult ritual that we see in the film is the birth of, stick with me here. All right. I know this is crazy. I told you it was going to be crazy. I think when you look at it like this, and when you take everything that we've gone through up till now, and you realize this is this is sort of Satan's debut to the big wide audience. This is Hollywood kind of pulling back the curtain. And the fact that we have this movie made by Roman Polanski, Rosemary's Baby, and in the movie we have this satanic coven, allegedly, that the movie's very weird. You just have to see. It's good. It's good. I would say for its time and for what it is, it's weird and it's creepy but it is what it is. Oh man, I just said that. We're gonna leave that in just as a private joke to the people who get it. Okay. I never say that, and I'm never gonna say it again. So mark your calendar. Boom. Lex Gordon said it is what it is in an episode. So here we go. So anyway, my point is this, and believe me, I know it's weird, but the Rosemary's Baby vehicle is the occult ritual where the Antichrist / Satan is born into mainstream Hollywood prestige. It's the birth of Satan being like loud and proud in Hollywood. This is in 1968. Now, it could be argued that that's going way out on a limb, but you know what? I'm sticking with it. So the Polanski connection starts to get really, it gets real, okay? This is where Hollywood's fictional occult horror collides with the tragic Manson story. Roman Polanski, as we know, directed Rosemary's Baby. Polanski married the actress Sharon Tate in July 1968, and Tate herself was an emerging Hollywood star. The Fearless Vampire Killers in 1967 was a movie she was in. She was in probably her most famous movie, Valley of the Dolls, also 1967. By 1969, she was pregnant with her first child. And she and Polanski were renting a house at 10050 Cielo Drive, Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles. Polanski was away in Europe, some people say conveniently enough, but working when the murders occurred. I'm not even getting into that. But what happened was, this gets really bizarre. So Charles Manson wanted to get into the entertainment industry. He was born in 1934. He lived until 2017. But before becoming the cult leader, he desperately wanted to be a professional singer and songwriter. He left prison he grew up in prison. He was in and out of prison his whole life. In 1967, when he got out, he moved to California, fell right into the counterculture. He played the guitar, wrote songs. People started following him. He sort of became a instant guru. He used LSD. He gave other drugs to the people in the group, also LSD, developed this increasingly apocalyptic worldview. This is the Cliff Notes version of Charles Manson. It's argued that he was an MK Ultra project and that he got mixed up in some of that. He actually got remarkably good reviews by some of the other musicians who were out there. Most notably, Neil Young said great things about him. But that whole thing went sideways, as we know, and one of the victims was Sharon Tate, who was pregnant, tragically, with Roman Polanski's baby, allegedly, and then she was killed by the Manson bunch right after, within a year of Roman Polanski making Rosemary's Baby, where Satan is born into, according to my analysis, the mainstream of Hollywood. So, amazing. Just shocking, terrible situation. But there's a few other people that sort of join into the chat here. Dennis Wilson and the Beach Boys. He was their drummer, founding member of the Beach Boys. He was one of Charles Manson's most important sort of connections into the Los Angeles music industry. The two had a tenuous relationship. They were friends and enemies back and forth. Reportedly, after Wilson encountered two women on the street, he was led to Charlie Manson, subsequently met Manson himself, and they became friends. And with some of with Dennis Wilson's money, it seems, allegedly, Manson family members grew, and he seemed to be spending enormous amounts of time at Wilson's home. This is on Sunset Boulevard. And Wilson was fascinated by Charlie Manson. A lot of people say maybe because of all the girls that was hanging around with him, but I guess he liked his music to some degree. I think he stole one of Manson's songs, and Manson didn't really like that and left bullets in Wilson's bed as sort of a warning. There's all this sketchiness. Wilson, he's got tons of money, he's got cars and a mansion, and Charlie Manson just obviously wants to be part of that. You know, he's this little weird, wiry guy. He's an ex-convict. He's playing the guitar with all these hippies. He's meeting people connected to the successful music scene. And, you know, it could have gone another way. If somebody would have actually recorded Manson, we might think of him as like a modern pop star that lived out his life. And I don't know. You can't speculate like that, but it's easy to. It's almost like you're compelled to. He wrote a song called Cease to Exist. And I think that's the one that he claimed that the Beach Boys stole the lyrics and changed the title. It became their song, Never Learn Not to Love. So you can go check that out. The song first appeared in 1968 on the B-side of the Beach Boys single Bluebirds Over the Mountain, subsequently included on the band's 1969 album 2020. Most famously, the original phrase cease to exist became cease to resist. So that's an easy rewrite. Dennis Wilson received the official songwriting credit, and Manson didn't receive anything. And that sort of pissed off Charlie Manson, not someone you want to piss off in 1969. So accounts differ, and there's all these, he said, she said going on around that whole thing. It's an extraordinary piece of music history, though, because it does show that Charlie Manson actually did succeed, at least indirectly, in getting his music commercially released, although not in a way that he was happy about. So, you know, he sort of waffled around then for a little while, and Manson got really close to a record deal because Dennis Wilson introduced him to record producer Terry Melcher. Now, interestingly, Terry Melcher is the son of Doris Day, famous actor and singer of the day. Terry Melcher wasn't really like a fringe character. He was an established producer. He'd worked with people like the Byrds, and he had genuine connections in the LA record business. This was a guy who was capable. He had connections. He had a career. He could have turned Manson into a professional recording artist. He heard Manson's music, and he liked it enough to start the process of contracting with him and the possibility of working together. Melcher also visited Manson and his followers at what was called Spawn Ranch. That's sort of this, if you know, you know. But no record deal ever came out of it. So it seems that Manson was, disappointed, but that's not the word I'm thinking of. But anyway, he was disappointed in the whole thing, and he still wanted the career, but it sort of became obvious that this isn't going to happen. Terry Melcher connects this failed musician and his ambition to one of the most infamous addresses in American history, because while this was going on, Manson, being a part of Melcher's sort of connections, Melcher was dating the actress Candice Bergen at the time, and she lived at 10050 Celio Drive, Benedict Canyon, LA, which would become the Sharon Tate residence. So Manson had already been there, which is crazy. By early 1969, Melcher and Candice Bergen had moved out of that area. I don't know if they lived together, but she definitely moved out, and the house was subsequently rented by Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, and that geographical connection is enormously important in the months to come in a tragic way, we know. So, as Manson's Hollywood dreams were sort of collapsing around him, the story sort of turns our investigation to the entertainment industry, not simply because he was trying to be a part of it, he genuinely did want to, And Dennis Wilson had almost given him like a taste of that success. The Beach Boys arguably, allegedly stole one of his songs. Terry Melcher listened to him, it never really went anywhere. And this is sort of taking this guy with all this energy and just kind of like dumping him back out on the street. Already a criminal character, lifelong. So this is also the same time when Wilson starts to distance himself from Manson. Manson's worldview starts to become increasingly apocalyptic. He started, you have to understand, these guys are tripping hard on heavy acid, like day in and day out. So when Manson listens to the Beatles album, the White Album, 1968, he has his own bizarre prophetic ideas of what's being said in those songs, like the songs Helter Skelter and Piggies and Blackbird. The song Revolution 9 comes out of Manson's sort of ravings. He believed that he was detecting messages and predictions in the music that only he could hear, or that were written by the musicians for him. Okay, so that's just what we know from his own story. This gives us another disturbing intersection between entertainment and Manson, that popular music was simultaneously something that Manson desperately wanted to be a part of, but he was increasingly interpreting some of that as containing these hidden communications about an approaching social catastrophe and a war, that a race war that he believed that he was put on Earth to create. I know, it's nuts. So remember, running parallel to all this is Kenneth Anger's occult underground and his creations. All this happens right before Gary Hinman gets murdered. So there's bad stuff that it sort of just went way out of control real fast. This was in late 1969. Bobby Beausoleil, Mary Bruner, and Susan Atkins went to Hinman's home in Topanga Canyon, and they held him captive during an extended confrontation, and he was ultimately killed. Now, August 6, 1969, that's only 2 days later, or 2 days before, rather, that Manson would send the other group to 10050 CLO Drive. I don't know how the right way to say 10050 CLO Drive is, 150, but it's not really. It's 10050. It's a terrible address in a lot of ways. Beausoleil was eventually convicted, as we know, of Hinman's murder, and he stayed in touch with Kenneth Anger. We know he made the soundtrack for the Lucifer Rising film, but it's interesting because we have this counterculture scene kind of falling apart, and the result being terrible violence. It's just, stuff got out of control. It's obvious. No symbolic interpretation is needed for all of that. That's occult influenced murder. The end. So, and just to tie up the loose ends, Manson, and I'm no expert, but Manson believed that he was supposed to start a race war, and that the black people in the world would defeat all the evil white people, and then he would be king of like the black people that were the victors. Why he would imagine that, I have no idea, because he wasn't black, but I don't know. It's a fool who looks for logic in the mind of Charlie Manson. This brings us to late August in 1969, when the Manson family members, or the followers, go to the home of Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, but we know he's in Europe. And also interesting, I've mentioned it before, Manson himself didn't go there. He didn't kill anyone there. Matter of fact, I don't think Charlie Manson ever killed anyone. He's always comes up on the list of the most hateful serial killers ever, but he never really killed anybody. I'm not saying he's not responsible, but it is interesting. So the people that did go were Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Crinkwell, Linda Kasabian, and five people were murdered by them. This is a tragedy. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but it was a mess, and they wrote stuff on the walls in blood, and it was a satanic ritual scene that the police walked into. It could be described as that. So not simply that, but you have Manson's ideology mixed in there, his apocalyptic beliefs, racial paranoia, countercultural ideas, personal domination, his bizarre interpretations of popular music. That's where we get arguably the word pig. And Helter Skelter was written in blood, I think on the refrigerator. I don't know. It was a mess and just a tragedy all around. So Manson and several of his followers drove around LA. That, I guess that would be the day after. Let's just rewind. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so yeah, the next day on the 10th, August 10th, 1969, they sort of jump in, I think, a Volkswagen van, and they're driving around town. And it was said that they were looking for other victims. They entered a house, Lino LaBianca and Rosemary LaBianca, 44 and 38. They tied the couple up and then left. And then some of the followers went back and committed the murder, killed the people, wrote "Death to Pigs" and "Rise," and Helter. I guess Helter Skelter that's where they wrote that. This sort of, according to the police, and when you look at the photographs, it looks like ritual theater staged for an audience. It's remarkable in the most horrific way. So this is far more than just killing somebody. It's making a huge visual statement out of the whole thing, which, once again, falls into Hollywood as visual spectacle. Just saying. So this brings us more into the modern connotations and connections. We have Katy Perry. This is an extraordinary modern Hollywood footnote. So right next door to the LaBianca party, which was one of the Manson family murder locations, is a big estate that was, ironically, a convent of nuns, Sisters of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, were located in a house right next door to the LaBianca party. Pop star Katy Perry tried to buy the convent, the former convent, the house. I think this was back in 2013, 2014. This led to years of litigation. Because why? Because the nuns didn't want her to have the house. Why did they not want her to have the house? Because according to them, she was a witch. They just called it like it was. Now, I heard some of this in Isaac Weishaupt's Occult Symbolism and Pop Culture podcast. Shout out to Isaac. By no means am I copying what he does. He is the expert on interpreting occult symbolism in Hollywood and beyond. And I'm just dipping my toes into this on this episode. So if you want to dig super deep into that, go check out Isaac Weishaupt's podcast called Occult Symbolism in Pop Culture. And tell him that Lex Gordon from Renegade Files sent you. So anyway, this is something that I did hear about on one of his shows, but I've also come across it in my own research that Katy Perry tried to buy this house of these nuns that was right next door to the LaBianca house, which was the Charlie Manson stomping grounds. But it seems that she tried unsuccessfully to buy it, but it just didn't really work out. I'm not sure if she ever was able to. Neighbors of the Beast, let's just call it. 665. So the LaBianca house sort of rears its head in entertainment when Zach Baggins, that's the host of Ghost Adventures, a ghost hunting show, did end up buying the property for pretty close to $2 million. He initially thought that he might film a paranormal project there, ultimately abandoned that plan out of respect for the LaBianca family. He later sold the property, basically breaking even. He might have took a little bit of a loss, like a 20 grand loss, but that's no big deal. So, interesting footnote though, that a ghost hunter would buy it, never really do anything with it, and sell it for break even. It's tied into the Manson mythology. It's a true crime landmark. Those things don't really fascinate me. There's tours you can take in LA where you can go around and see where everybody was killed. It's a little macabre. But then again, I go do ghost hunts, so to each his own. Now, we're going to come back to Anton LaVey real quick, because he also in the process of making these movies, he in 1970 he made a film called Satanic, The Devil's Mass. This is a documentary filmed about LaVey and the Church of Satan. Let me just correct myself and say that it was filmed partly in San Francisco, and he appears in it. Let's see who made that. My notes get a little confused at this point. I don't really have it right here. I'm not going to look it up, but it is a documentary that tells the story of Anton LaVey. Let me just correct that. It's not a movie that he made. We also have a movie called The Devil's Reign. That's in 1975. A horror movie starring Ernest Borgnine, William Shatner, and Tom Skerritt. You are in good hands with those actors. Maybe I should go check that movie out. I've never seen it. It's said that movie also has an early appearance by a very young John Travolta. I think that Anton LaVey was maybe a technical advisor on that film. You know you're making a scary movie when you need the Church of Satan founder LaVey to be your technical advisor. So Hollywood deliberately hired this guy because he was a famous publicist for Satan. It's just crazy. So anyway, this establishes a few things that in the 1960s, we have all these separate worlds that kind of collide. We have Anton LaVey building the Church of Satan, turning satanic ritual into these media spectacles. He's got all these big shot entertainers as friends. They have money. They help him make his church bigger, better, faster. At the same time, we have Charlie Manson in the area. He's looking in from outside. You know, he's kind of a wannabe Hollywood entertainment guy. He never really cracks it. And then he's just sort of, yeah, man, he takes the dark road out of that failure for sure. Mixed in the whole thing, the whole way, is Kenneth Anger, collaborating with Bobby Beausoleil, who's a Manson associate / convicted murderer. Then we get Roman Polanski, who made one of Hollywood's most defining satanic films, Rosemary's Baby. He's married to the woman who gets pregnant and then killed by the Manson family, Sharon Tate. The whole thing just interconnected in 1,000 ways. It's almost like a conspiracy theorist's dream come true, or nightmare come true, let's just say. No one would wish for any of this, especially me. But if you're into pulling threads and making connections, the whole thing is tailor-made for it. It's almost begs the research. The association of all this becomes very culturally powerful because, you know, even though a lot of it is built around murder, that's just the culmination of the chaos of the whole thing falling apart. It's not evidence of a Hollywood murder conspiracy, but what it is a lot of fuel to the fire. Decades later, we have the whole geography itself still pulling these fringe occult characters in for some reason. We have the La Bianca house, Katy Perry trying to buy the convent of Nun property next door to it, Zach Baggins' ghost adventure guy buying the house, gonna do a ghost hunt thing there, decides not to. So by the end of the 60s, we have occultism, Satanism, murder, rock and roll, experimental movies, this Hollywood celebrity culture. All of this is tangled up. All of it's mixed together. And the public is just looking at it from the outside, and none of it makes any sense. They're like, what the hell is going on here? This is mythology. It's crazy performance art. It's real murder, terrible tragedy, and all mixed into this pretend world of Hollywood. This leads us into the next part, which is occultism becoming popular culture. This is where we've been leading the whole time. These ideas, they stop belonging mainly to the occultists and the underground figures. And they start appearing on a large scale in all kinds of things like rock music, rap, movies, lyrics, mass market entertainment, TV. It just sort of almost becomes mainstream. So let's get into it. The first to do it. Each time we take a step forward, we take a little bit of a step back, but you gotta give the OGs their due. So the OGs of Black Magic on a record label, or a band called Coven. They were in Chicago, started in 1967, lasted for years. They were fronted by a man named, stage name Jinx Dawson. Coven performed overt occult satanic stage shows way before heavy metal. This was in, as I said, 67. The band opened for acts like the Yardbirds and Alice Cooper, and their stage show incorporated things like inverted crosses, devil horns, hand gestures of satanic symbols, ritualistic energy. I think Witchcraft Destroys Minds and Reaps Souls was their album. That's not subliminal. That's pretty forward, right? Witchcraft Destroys Minds and Reaps Souls. That came out June 15, 1969, released on Mercury Records. That's a huge record label. This isn't some garage thing. The songs include titles like Black Sabbath, Pact with Lucifer, Dignitaries of Hell, one of their big ones, and a song called Coven in Charing Cross. The album concluded with a 13-minute song called Satanic Mass. This is chanting satanic prayers. It's upfront, wear it on your sleeve, Satanism on a record. No interpretation needed. The gatefold shows Jinx Dawson, that's the lead singer. He's nude on an altar, surrounded by hooded figures. We see the text of the Black Mass. This is like this crazy thing that Satanists read. It's like the Bible backwards and everything. It's one of rock history's most amazing realities that this even happened. Coven's bassist was credited as Oz Osbourne, and their opening song was Black Sabbath. Now, neither of them had anything to do with Ozzy Osbourne or the band Black Sabbath. It's just ironic that would be a coincidence. Now, maybe Black Sabbath pulled from this. There's no reason to think they might not have, but it just doesn't seem like the two are connected. Just a weird coincidence. There's also, once again, this is I keep telling you, man, it's crazy. So I know you believe me by now, but it gets crazier. So the album hit the shelves at exactly the same time as the Tate LaBianca murders. Also maybe a coincidence, but kind of creepy. Later reissue histories state that the controversy became considerably worse when Charlie Manson was photographed holding a copy of the album. That's like press you don't need, isn't it? So anyway, at that point, a lot of the stores pulled the records from the shelves, and it sort of went downhill for the band from there, at least on a publicity front. But there's no such thing as bad publicity. So arguably, they maybe sold a few more records because of it. If anything, they broke even in the process. So it's great. It's nuts. This leads us into the Rolling Stones. So if the band Coven and their hijinks, even though it was a big record label, no one would say that it was mainstream, regardless. But the Rolling Stones, on the other hand, with the Rolling Stones, we get Satan entering mainstream rock. Their album from December 1967 was entitled Their Satanic Majesty's Request. Once again, no interpretation needed. The Rolling Stones put the word satanic directly into the title of their album. It was a play on the British phrase Her Britannic Majesty. Rather than saying Britannic, they said satanic. That was their little pun on words, or pun rather. So the next development was their 1968 song called Sympathy for the Devil. Once again, no interpretation necessary. It was released on Beggar's Banquet, December 68. Mick Jagger sings from the first-person perspective of Lucifer, moving through historical episodes of violence, revolution, war, and religious killing. The song's point is more complicated than Satan worship. The devil's narration implicates human beings themselves in the evil attributed to him. So this is very interesting, very clever, and like Satanists love to do, sort of an inversion of expectation. This has an enormous cultural effect at the time. One of the world's biggest rock stars is performing as Lucifer in the first person. Remember the Kenneth Anger connection? It takes us right back to that. So, and if you recall, if you don't, that Mick Jagger made the soundtrack for Kenneth Anger's Invocation of My Demon Brother movie. Facts. So Anger's films weren't really horror entertainment. They were like, as we said before, rituals. They were capturing rituals. He was doing that on purpose. Occultism, an enormously successful entertainer like Jagger, genuine contact. He has what we would call today a platform. So he has influence over a huge audience, and he's bringing out this Satanism right up front, and it's maybe split his audience a little bit. It's funny because if you look at it now, it seems to me that people just kind of take that in stride. We think of it as a pop song. Please allow me to introduce myself. It's a song, it's Satan singing to you. No big deal, right? It's on the radio. It's top 40. Fascinating. I'm not against it or for it. I'm not an enemy of the Rolling Stones. I'm also not a gigantic fan. I do like some of what they did. This also leads us to something that's a little bit sketchy. Once again, tragedy in Hollywood with the killing of concert goer Meredith Hunter at a Rolling Stones concert. And I'm just going to open up the document here and read a little bit of this. We're not going to go super deeply into it, but Meredith Hunter was a young black man. He was stabbed and killed at the Altamont Free concert in California, December 6, 1969, by a man named Alan Passaro, who was a member of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang. So what was happening there is, at the urging of the Grateful Dead, the Rolling Stones used the Hells Angels for their security, because I guess the Grateful Dead had done so in the past, and they were like, yeah, these guys are cool, you got to do them, and so it happened. Now, this was a concert that was, I think it was outdoor, Altamont Free concert, attended by between 250,000 and 300,000 people. So that's a mess, no matter how you put it. It included performances by Jefferson Airplane, Santana, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and the Flying Burrito Brothers. So not exactly lightweights. Also performing the Rolling Stones. The Grateful Dead had planned to play that day, but they canceled their set when they saw the violence during the concert, namely this young man named Meredith Hunter, who was stabbed and killed by one of the security guys who was a Hells Angel. Now, this goes way off the rails. There's been years of speculation about it. It's the whole event was actually captured on film and became part of a documentary about the concert. That's outrageous. It's really, nowadays you can't even say killed on YouTube, but they could actually film someone getting killed at a concert and put it in a documentary. It's just phenomenal. A different world back then. Arguably, there are people who say that whole thing was an elaborate satanic sacrifice. And one of the people who had a really good vantage point and was able to film it was our old buddy from Star Wars, George Lucas. But what happened was, he was up on a little pillar. He's got a view of the audience. He's standing right over where that guy got killed, and he films it. And everyone sort of makes a big deal that, boy, wasn't that fortuitous that he just happened to be there, and George Lucas able to film that at the moment that it happened. But what happened is his camera malfunctioned, and so his footage didn't really go anywhere. He wasn't able to get it, or something messed up and it didn't work. But someone else filmed it, people who were filming the concert, and they put it into their documentary. So, it's a tragedy no matter what. Oh, and guess, I think, what song were they singing when that happened? Sympathy for the Devil. So there's that. And that's my only aside for that. It's just kind of a very tragic, sad aside. Now, not to say that the guy deserved it, but the person that was killed, Meredith Hunter, was, by all accounts, a villain. He had been in and out of jail for drug dealing. He was that cliche drug dealer that allegedly would give some free to the little kids first, like that type of guy. At least that's the backstory of who he was. I don't know. And I don't think he deserved all that. But it did happen. So this leads us into Black Sabbath. These are the sort of occult horror creates heavy metal section. They're from Birmingham, England. We all know them. Ozzy Osbourne and the gang. Their self-titled album, released February 13, 1970. Now, one of the members, bassist and lyricist Geezer Butler, I think he wrote most of the songs, most of the lyrics anyway. He had developed an interest in the occult and black magic literature, and he later described waking late one night and seeing a large dark figure standing at the foot of his bed. This is what we would call a shadow figure these days. And it seems that he had been given a book by Ozzy Osbourne, some occult witchcraft book, and he had placed it on a shelf before going to sleep. And when he woke up and saw the apparition, he believed, or he claims that after that, the book was gone, like it disappeared. The apparition came and took the book, according to Geezer Butler, who's the main lyricist and bassist for Black Sabbath. Now, that's quite a story. The song Black Sabbath actually describes someone being confronted by a terrifying supernatural figure, and it's said that experience was the inspiration for the song. Now, this is important because Sabbath wasn't necessarily saying worship Satan. Really, what they were doing was saying Satan and black magic are terrifying. That's, if you really look at it with an objective eye, an ear, I should say. The original album's gatefold contained a large inverted cross. You can still find copies that have that. The band said that the record company added it without consulting them. Geezer Butler, who came from a Catholic family, recalled being worried about his parents actually seeing the record. So even here, we have this satanic rock band, quote unquote, and an image of an upside down cross. But what we find out later is that was actually manufactured and amplified by the entertainment industry itself. Why? Because darkness sells records, and satanic ideas are controversial, and controversy sells records. And it's funny. I remember hearing a story from actually out of the horse's mouth from Ozzy Osbourne when he was being interviewed. Some television show I was watching, and the interviewer said, there's accusations that you conjure the devil before a show. And Ozzy Osbourne just kind of laughed and said, I have enough of a hard time conjuring myself out of bed in the morning, much less conjuring Satan before a show, that kind of thing. And it just cracked me up. I always loved Ozzy. Ozzy rules. We do have a very interesting situation that came about, which was in Sacramento, California. This was in April of 1982, the great backmasking controversy. And if you don't know what backmasking is taking an actual physical vinyl record, putting it on the record player and spinning it, putting it on neutral and spinning it backwards and playing the record backwards. And you can hear arguably or allegedly different language in there, and sometimes it sounds like it's saying something if you get the speed just right. So this is interesting because California lawmakers actually listened to rock and roll records backwards at this time. At a legislative hearing, lawmakers were presented with supposedly satanic reversed recordings, including Stairway to Heaven played backwards. Proposed legislation would have required warning labels on records that contained backwards messages. Now, this is amazing. It's one of those things that probably no one would have ever done if they didn't make it a huge splashy news story, that satanic messages are encoded in these songs, and if you play them backwards, then you hear the satanic messages. They might as well, back in 1982, have called that news story, hey kids, go get your rock records and play them backwards on your record player, because at the time, that's what everyone did. It became a huge thing. And I really wish, I'm glad it wasn't, but it would be interesting to see the memes that would have popped up on the internet had we had the internet back then. So anyway, then we have Iron Maiden, who then we move into this time frame where the rock and roll guys aren't hiding it anymore. So we have Iron Maiden release an album called The Number of the Beast, which is invoking the biblical 666. The album artwork depicts the band's mascot, Eddie, controlling Satan like a puppet. while Satan controls another smaller eddy. This is the idea of as above, so below. That sort of like everything is connected, sort of. It's a stretch. But the title song describes a man witnessing what appears to be an occult ritual, and it contains imagery involving chanting, fire, Satan, and 666. None of that is hidden. American religious groups had a fit about this. They accused the band of Satanism. Records were publicly destroyed on news shows, burning of the records. It was just one of those panic moments. And the band just loved it. They made it part of their image. They put those pictures of Christian and priests in robes burning their records in their posters and promotional materials when they would do a show. Their next album was called Peace of Mind, and if I recall, it shows Eddie with his skull removed and like maybe he's eating a brain, or a brain that's part of some dish. I can't remember exactly, but I'm sure I could look it up. I'm not going to. No offense, and I'm going to get some hate from the people who love Iron Maiden. They rock. There's no doubt about it. Iron Maiden rocks. Not my favorite band, not my least favorite band, but no doubt you can't deny their contribution to rock and roll. Or I call that's revealing my age when I call it rock and roll. These kids and their god dang rock and roll. Anyway, at the beginning of their song Still Life, their drummer Nico McBrain recorded a deliberately nonsensical message, and the band reversed it and put it on the record so that if you did play that backwards, you would hear what he was saying, and that was done on purpose. Kind of leveraging the whole backward record phenomenon. But it was basically them just making fun of people who would do that. But wouldn't you be shocked if you did that and you heard him? I don't remember what it said. I should have looked it up. But once again, this is a super long episode. We're not going to go there. Hey, how about this? You look it up. What is the message that Nico McBrain recorded on the song Still Life on the album Peace of Mind by Iron Maiden? Tell me what it is in a comment. Okay, so this brings us to Motley Crue. This is one of the first sort of pieces of pop culture Satanism that I ever remember seeing, which was their album called Shout at the Devil, 1983. I was a kid, probably junior high, and this brings the whole thing back to Los Angeles. That album, I think, had a big pentagram on the front of it. Bassist Nikki Sixx previously played with Sister, a theatrical LA band involving future Wasp singer Blackie Lawless. All that brings back junior high headbanging days. This is shock rock imagery. This is blood, occult symbolism, theatrical darkness, everything. They're throwing it all at the wall with Shout at the Devil. Shout at the Devil, not shout to the devil. Once again, satanic imagery could sell the product, even when the underlying message, it wasn't exactly Satan worship. It was just hardcore rock and roll at the time. What would be considered serious hard rock. The satanic panic of the 1980s, of course, we have to mention. So we covered that in an episode. The concern goes way beyond rock music. It gets into heavy metal, of course, but also Dungeons and Dragons, horror movies, occult books. We have the whole daycare center chat. This is basically people being scared about teenagers who read a lot, fantasy games, and we don't want those kids using their crazy imagination. But I guess some of it was been founded. You know, parents are protective, and this was the first. Okay, basically what happened was in a macro view. In the 50s, kids were put in front of the TV and no one really worried about it. In the 60s, yeah, the kids are just being weird. They're smoking some weed. It's okay. Then we get we go through the 70s, early 70s, late 60s. People are dying in this pop culture arena. You know, murder, blood on the walls, writing with blood on the refrigerator type thing. Wait a minute. Let's maybe as a collective parents of the world reel this in a little bit. Nobody wants their kid joining the Manson family. And then in the 70s, the 70s was sort of an outlier. You know, cop shows and blaxploitation films and a lot of kind of when the hippies grew up, we got the 70s. And then from there, in the 80s, parents who are career driven, women are entering the workforce. A lot of kids are latchkey. A lot of kids are, raising themselves at home in front of the TV, eating cup of noodles, macaroni and cheese, and drinking out of the hose. So what happens is all of a sudden this satanic thing enters the public consciousness, and parents, the fear jumps right into them because they don't really know what the kids are doing. That's my macro analysis of how all that happened. This is a time of alleged secret satanic cults, kids saying there's tunnels under the daycare center. Just, it all goes bizarre. It's not that it's all false, but a lot of it is conjecture. So some entertainment products unquestionably contained occult and satanic imagery also. So then it's like, look, here's the evidence. But the real imagery gets mixed together with this increasingly extreme allegations of vast secret networks, ritual abuse, murder. All of that ultimately lacked a lot of credible evidence. Nothing really came of most of it. A lot of the kids came back and said they were sort of guided. Doesn't mean that no one was ever hurt ever by a Satanist. I'm not saying that. The occult entertainment was a real thing. That doesn't automatically make every conspiracy theory built around it real. Just facts. So this leads us to the Parents Music Resource Center. Something was founded in 1985, and this is basically Washington entering the culture war. It was founded by politically connected Washington women, including Tipper Gore, Susan Baker, Pam Howar, and Sally Nevius. Not saying that they didn't have virtuous intentions, but we all know what the road to hell is paved with: good intentions. So I was speaking to a friend of mine earlier. They came up with this idea to put parental advisory lyrics or damaging lyrics or whatever, those stickers, a little black and white rectangle that they put on any record with a curse word in it or with a satanic imagery or any kind of gangster violent stuff. And basically what that functioned as was a sticker that said "buy me" to every teenager in the world, and it blew the record sales up. And even to the fact where graphic designers would put that on the record sleeve without even having to. So it sort of backfired their censorship ideas. Not that they didn't have good intentions. They came up with a famous, what they called the Filthy 15. These were songs by Prince, Judas Priest, Motley Crue, AC/DC, and Black Sabbath. And it was just, those songs became the poster boys for naughty rock music, according to these women in Washington that tried to censor it all. Famously, there was a U.S. Senate hearing. This was September 19, 1985, when Frank Zappa, Dee Snider, and John Denver testified. And this was the moment where Dee Snider, who was the very dramatic, flamboyant frontman of the band called Twisted Sister, absolutely obliterated Tipper Gore in a debate. It's cringy to watch because he just deconstructs her argument in a dramatic and eloquent, very intelligent way. And you know what? If we're gonna take freedom fighting and freedom of speech to the wall, who is a better frontman than the bouffant, giant hairdo, 80s rock legend, sort of non-binary character of Dee Snider from the band Twisted Sister? Power to the people. So the hearings helped lead the music industry, and basically that's from that we get this parental advisory label, which sold more records than any record executive marketing guy ever could. And that sort of evolves into some more, not necessarily that, but that time frame, we get some weird kind of like murderous activity rears its head again in Southern California. So this was 1984-85. The character called the Night Stalker, this was Richard Ramirez, murdered and attacked victims throughout Southern California, reportedly shouted "Hail Satan" when he was in court, and he showed a pentagram that was drawn on his palm, in one court appearance. He showed that to the cameras or whatever. He was a huge fan of AC/DC, and media coverage reportedly connected him with the band's album Highway to Hell. One AC/DC song in particular, The Night Prowler, became particularly attached to Ramirez and his mythology. There's no evidence that AC/DC caused him to commit the crimes, let me just say. And there's also no evidence that AC/DC is anything but one of the greatest rock bands in the world. My personal opinion, I love them, and I've never heard a fly. So that's the truth, Ruth. It's just interesting that we have this connection of rock and murder once again. And, you know, Hollywood makes a huge deal out of that. The news, everything. It becomes a cultural thing. They just couldn't wait for something to happen because they wanted that Manson era energy again to report real murders and fringe imagery and connect it to rock and roll. And they just, it's like the way that the people who do the weather can't wait for a hurricane. And this is just me saying allegedly. I'm not sure if an individual who reports the news really wants that. But when it does happen, it's their bread and butter, is it not? So murderers liking popular music, it's not necessarily a promotion of evil, but it's interesting when they become connected in such a way that it becomes part of our maybe not understanding, but at least our interpretation and our national conversation about the topic. It's interesting. So what's happened to where do we stand now after going through this up to this point? Well, we know the occult had undergone this sort of major transformation. Crowley, and in those days it existed outside ceremonial magic, secret societies, occult literature. If you knew, you knew. If you didn't, no clue. Then with Anton LaVey, he sort of makes ritual like a theater. He does the whole media spectacle thing. He invites the news in to see what he's doing. Why? Because he likes publicity, and he's connected to Hollywood, the elite. He wants them in his church because they have money. And also because he's a performer too. There's no other way to say it. Then we get Kenneth Anger, talked about him a bunch, but his occult philosophy becomes experimental cinema. You can't separate the two. Then we have the band The Coven in Chicago. They precede the Rolling Stones, Black Sabbath, Led Zepp. All those guys carry occult themes to enormously bigger audiences. And then we have this sort of thing happen in the 80s where they just stamp it right on the front. Shout at the Devil, Iron Maiden. The hidden symbols are gone. We have it like front and center. Motley Crue, all that. This gives us, because there was some bad stuff going on, we have some killers show up in the scene, that we have all of a sudden the Satanic Panic in the 80s. This results in the PRMC and the censorship, which puts stamps on the records that say parental advisory. What does that do? All it does is sell more records. So the whole thing, it just fuels, it's like pouring gas on a fire, literally. And that sets the next stage, which is this Hollywood industry no longer needs like an album called Number of the Beast or Shout at the Devil, because they would start to adopt the visual vocabulary of mainstream celebrity culture, and it would become part of the occultist agenda. I know that sounds crazy, but that's exactly what has happened and what is happening. So this leads us to the next part, which is the modern occult aesthetic. This is the occult becoming a visual language. So by the 1990s, the early 2000s, occult imagery, it's no longer confined to these explicitly dark artists or even heavy metal. Absolutely not only to underground culture. It started to move into mainstream pop, mainstream fashion, photography, music videos, advertising, award shows, and celebrity imagery. They all jump on board. Certain visual motifs start showing up over and over. The covering up of one eye, holding up a triangle with your fingers and hands, a pyramid in the background, horns, snakes, checkerboard floors, masks, theatrical masks, the idea of the ritual circle, motifs of fire, scenes of death and rebirth, references to ancient Egypt. All of this is occult symbolism. And there's probably a dozen more things that I've left out, maybe more. So some of these have very clear artistic explanations. Others have genuine historical connections, okay, but rarely. Now, a lot of it occult, esoteric, yes. The conspiracy theory takes the repetition itself, the imagery itself, and says this is evidence that something deeper is happening. Facts. So, who are the players in that game? Modern. Madonna, 1989, Like a Prayer. This video combines Catholic imagery, burning crosses, stigmata, religious statues, and all of it blended with overt sexuality and what could be described as religious ecstasy. You have to understand, going back to that time, 1989, the controversy surrounding this was staggering. I know we don't think of Madonna as like the herald of Satanism these days, but go back to 1989 when that song Like a Prayer came out, and it's her dancing around and having sex and burning crosses and all that. It was a watershed controversial moment. The Vatican themselves actually condemned the video. So religious groups protested it. Pepsi canceled their advertising with Madonna and her tour after the video came out. Heads were rolling, no pun intended. So it's not really Satanism, but it's Madonna demonstrating that deliberately mixing sexuality and transgressions and sacred imagery, what people would know as religious symbols, that can generate some serious controversy. But what else did she discover in the process? What else could it generate? Worldwide attention. And nothing sells like attention. That's a fact. So she sort of, I think she just was trying to shock. I think she knew. I think she was conscious of that. She was trying to get the worldwide attention, and man, she did it. And she sort of adopted a Hebrew name of Esther. She started wearing a red string around her hand, talking about the Kabbalah all the time. And that's occultism in maybe its benign aspects, but her association with this esoteric spirituality was something that she sort of projected onto her persona. It was genuinely mystical component, according to her. Not saying it was anything negative about it, but it's her personal interest and it's her artistic identity kind of coming together. Very interesting. Very interesting. So then we have this is sort of like what would you call it? This is occult symbolism in Hollywood, like 101, the all-seeing eye. So it's the first thing everyone goes to. I'm getting to it way deep because I didn't want to just lead with that anyway. But here it is. We have to talk about it. The single eye, one of the most frequently cited images in modern entertainment conspiracy culture. It's remarkably simple. A celebrity poses with one of their eyes covered or obscured, sometimes by a hand, sometimes by hair, sometimes by clothing or some other object. I remember seeing a series of posters for The Lord of the Rings, the original trilogy, Peter Jackson, and every single poster, it was one of the characters, and they all had one of their eyes covered up. I think with Frodo, he's holding up the ring, and it's covering up his eye. There's one of the posters has Aragorn on the poster, the ranger, and he's holding up the sword, and the sword is going up his face and covering up one of his eye. And over and over and over again, time after time after time, every character who is featured on a poster as the main character facing forward is got one of his eyes covered up. It's shocking to see it. Have you ever seen one of those memes where they show over and over and over and over every celebrity doing it, every rapper, every singer? I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. You could find 1,000 of them with a Google search. I'll put some of those in the photos in the dark intel files if I can find some public domain ones or fair use at least. And it's shocking when you see it because it goes way beyond coincidence. Now, then we get into the whole thing. Are they doing it because they're copying each other? Are they doing it because it's controversial or because it sells? I don't know. I don't know if there's much really to be actually drilled down from that. Examples involve major musicians, actors, models. They become so numerous that you can compile an enormous gallery of these. So the occult interpretation is that the pose covering one eye is a reference to the all-seeing eye, what's called the Eye of Providence, also the Eye of Horus. This is all Illuminati stuff. Those symbols all have different histories. The Eye of Horus comes from ancient Egyptian religion. The Eye of Providence, this is generally depicted as an eye inside a triangle. It's surrounded by rays. This is Christian art. You can see it in some of the Renaissance paintings, later adopted into Freemasonry. It also appears above the unfinished pyramid on the back of the Great Seal of the United States. That's on the dollar bill. So the unanswered cultural question is, a celebrity covering one eye up for a photograph, it's obviously not proof of membership in any secret society, but it seems like it is. It seems like it's their signal, like I play ball, or I'm one of us. I'm not sure. Fashion photographers love asymmetry. It's part of design. So a partially covered up face creates a striking image. It's shocking when you look at 100 of them in a row. Let me just put it that way. So this leads us to the big dog, right? The Illuminati. This is the real organization behind the modern myth, as we say. The actual organization was called the Bavarian Illuminati, founded by a man named Adam Weishaupt on May 1st, 1776. No relation to Isaac Weishaupt, the podcaster, which he has pointed out a million times. And I don't blame him. It's an unfortunate shared last name. But this was in Bavaria, 1776. Auspicious date, right? That they would found the Illuminati at the same time that they would start getting things going in the United States, at least officially. Weishaupt was a professor of law. He created a secret organization. He was influenced by the Enlightenment. He was opposed to what he considered excessive religious and government control. So he's sort of a rebel in that regard, an intellectual one, though. The Bavarian government eventually outlawed the organization and other secret societies sometime around the 1780s. So, like, no more of that. But you know what? It's kind of hard to outlaw a secret society because of the whole secret thing. They can't, you know what? That's like a badge of honor. You start a secret society and the government outlaws you, you've accomplished your goal. Their symbology and symbolism has just never went away. So by the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the eye, the triangle, the pyramid, those are shorthand for the Illuminati. And regardless of whether that imagery has anything to do with the original organization, it's part of our culture nonetheless. So who are some of the people that have made a career of showing us all that? Well, Jay-Z, constantly showing his little triangle symbol. It's called the rock diamond. It's like you make a little triangle with your hand. The documented explanation is that it represents Rockefeller Records and it's their little logo. I don't know about all that. But viewed through Illuminati mythology, the diamond could also look like a triangle or a pyramid. And a lot of people say that that's what's going on there. This helps produce an enormous online mythology surrounding Jay-Z, of course. And this leads us to his lady, Beyonce. So Beyonce has expressed that she has an alter ego that she calls Sasha Fierce. This gets into a whole MK Ultra monarch sort of brain division, multiple personality thing, evidence of mind control. She openly describes Sasha Fierce as the alternate personality she assumes while performing. This goes way back in occult history. It's kind of occult history sort of fodder that shows up time and time again. Witches will adopt the persona of a long gone witch in a ritual. Stevie Nicks has said that there's a certain energy that takes over when she sings this song, Rihanna, is that the name of it? Rihanna. Anyway, that's a fantastic song, and there's a video of her doing it live where she just goes to another planet, and if I can find it, I'll put it in the Dark Intel files too, because it's impressive. She's one of my favorites too. I actually saw her live in concert, and Stevie Nicks, she's outstanding. So Beyonce explains that Sasha allows her to become more aggressive, confident, and sexually uninhibited on stage. And we see this with method actors. They get lost in the process sometimes. But occult and conspiracy researchers interpret these descriptions far more literally, like she's channeling. So the theories claim that Sasha Fierce represents a sort of spirit possession. Some even say demonic entity. This surrounds the entertainment industry. There's no credible evidence that Sasha Fierce actually represents a literal possession, but would there be? Okay, what are you going to have? A signed memo from the demon? Just because she has another personality that merges with her on stage? We're all just supposed to say that's a normal thing. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. This leads us to another person who's vastly talented, Lady Gaga. Say what you will, but she belts it out. Bad Romance, 2009, her rise through a much darker and stranger visual vocabulary into mainstream pop. The Bad Romance video depicts Lady Gaga emerging from a sterile bathhouse environment. We also could get into the whole bath thing. How many celebrities have died in a bathtub? That's said to be a cult ritual. Anyway, in the video, she's drugged, she's displayed, she's apparently sold to a man, and then she ultimately destroys him. The video incorporates coffin-like pods, mask, crosses, distorted eyes, death, transformation ritual. These are things that are allegedly Illuminati initiations, celebrity programming, once again, mind control is involved. The conventional interpretation is that she was creating this surreal art about fame, exploitation, sex, power. Sure, we get that. But those interpretations aren't mutually exclusive, and the influences and imagery and what you see when you watch it, it seems extremely occultish. There's no two ways about it. So she also has this situation with Alejandro and Judas. So Alejandro, that's 2010. That video mixes Catholicism, sexuality, death imagery. It's almost like a nod back to the Madonna controversy. She appears wearing a nun's outfit. She got rosary beads, and these become like a sexualized object, quote unquote, crosses all over the scene. At one point, she swallows the rosary beads. It's very provocative. The Catholic League publicly condemned the video. Then she went further into her biblical symbolism when she portrayed Mary Magdalene, and Norman Reedus played Judas. Jesus and the apostles were like a motorcycle gang, and that video we see betrayal, baptism, some sexuality, religious iconography. She's ultimately symbolically stoned, and not in the good way. So there's a lot going on there. That it seems to be on a surface level just courting the controversy of it, kind of the sensationalism sells records sort of thing. And it may be that. And she's arguably talented. She can definitely sing. But you know what though? And I sort of make my own point. A lot of people can sing. What is it that drives one person to the top and leaves another person behind? And why is it that the people at the top are constantly paying homage to all this satanic and occult imagery? It just seems a little much. I don't know what to make of it. We have Katy Perry, a little witchcraft thing at the Oscars. There's a lot that's going on. This alter ego pattern. There's a lot of them. So I'll just briefly go through some of those. So the celebrities who have that we know officially or publicly have named their alternate personalities. Beyonce, we know Sasha Fierce. Nicki Minaj has Roman Zolansky. Kind of weird that would be her alter ego, a sort of pun on Roman Polanski, and we know his connections to all this madness. Eminem has Slim Shady, and then there's this whole sort of rabbit hole of Eminem being cloned. That's a whole nother episode. David Bowie has Ziggy Stardust. So, and there's a bunch more, but there's this situation, Madonna famously reinvents herself, or, when she was rocking, she did. So Cher, right? A bunch of them, maybe not say, hey, I have a second personality like some of those do. Free Britney, right? So it's interesting that it's not unusual for actors to play roles or entertainers to have different personas. A lot of people use pseudonyms. I'm not condemning that by any means. It's just interesting how often it shows up in in this situation. That it becomes strands of MK Ultra, Monarch programming. Like I said, MK Ultra was real. We know that. We did a whole episode on it. Go back and check that one out. The checkerboard floor is kind of a weird one. It's this black and white checkerboard floor. You see it when you start to look for it. You see it all the time. It's everywhere. It's linked to Freemasonry. That connection is real. Masonic lodges frequently use the black and white checkered floor. Sometimes it's called even the mosaic or Masonic pavement. It's meant to represent the two opposites of light and dark, above, below, joy and sorrow, good and evil. So these checkerboard floors, though, when you start looking for them in pop culture products, it's everywhere. It's in music videos, it's in stage shows, it's in award shows. We also have all the pyramids. We know all that. Baphomet, he's the big dog in satanic symbolism. He's a sabbatic goat, often used to portray the Christian devil, but he's not exactly that. But you can't talk about Satanism without talking about Baphomet. The question becomes, why do entertainers keep using this stuff? We've talked about some of the explanations already. Occult imagery is visually powerful. It communicates secret, danger, rebellion, sex, transformation, forbidden knowledge, and power. So all these things are extremely valuable to someone trying to communicate quickly and with imagery. It also generates controversy, and nothing sells like nothing. There's no such thing as bad publicity. Controversy is publicity. That's all it is. It generates attention. And the commercial incentive is there. Ever since Anton LaVey started inviting reporters to see his ceremonies, satanic imagery gets a front seat. So there's another possibility, and that is that artists and creative directors genuinely are fascinated by religion and mysticism and ceremonial magic and mythology and esoteric symbolism. Jimmy Page unquestionably was. Kenneth Anger also. Madonna, absolutely. So it could be very simplistic that every occult-looking image in entertainment, it's put there for the purposeful generation of attention. I think that when you really go through it and you start looking at it, it seems to be a little more than that to me personally. The occult, it's traveled an extraordinary distance. Crowley practiced it, LaVey, Kenneth Anger, all these guys were early Hollywood agenda drivers of Satanism and occult symbolism, let's just say. It became embedded in early Hollywood. Is it now marketing and art? Yes. Is it rebellion? Probably. It's also genuine esoteric interest? That's the question. The deeper conspiracy claims are that some of these performances function as actual ritual. They hypnotize the masses. They give their own agenda weight by drawing everyone into it. The sort of chanting that goes on at concerts. Taylor Swift employs it. She gets everyone saying the same thing over and over. That's powerful. Whether or not there's good, bad, indifferent ends, it seems ritualistic. It is. Absolutely. The rituals of the stage, let's just say. Thank you for coming along and enduring this with me. We're going to wrap it up. So what happens? A performance starts to look like a ceremony. Occult imagery around the 2010s had moved off of album covers and music videos and onto these big giant stages. The Super Bowl halftime show, award shows, MTV Music Awards, major concerts. These are enormous stages, elaborate choreography, massive video screens, audiences numbering in the tens of millions. So this creates a new argument. If a performance contains symbolic costumes, choreographed participants, fire, transformation, sacrifice imagery, invocations, gods, demons, occult symbolism, at what point does the theatrical spectacle turn into a ritual? The mainstream will tell you that these are just entertainment productions. But the deeper conspiracy seems like the audience isn't merely watching, the audience is part of the ritual. That's what we have to be aware of. And a Hollywood witch herself, I heard in an interview, say, you can be part of the manipulation if you don't know. But if you know you're being manipulated, you can recognize it and step out of it. If it's something that you don't want to be afraid, that you don't want to be involved in, click, turn it off. Simple as that. So the fascinating part is, are these huge Hollywood productions and giant mass culture events. Occult symbolism ritual at this point. It certainly looks like it. It absolutely does. If an alien came here from another planet and you showed him a Super Bowl halftime show full of devils and Satan and whatever, they would say, this is the culture worshiping their gods. And remember, glamour comes from ancient terminology, which means to hypnotize, to put a spell upon. And so the glamour of Hollywood is a spellbinding industry. It absolutely is. And these big Super Bowl shows and award shows that look like elaborate satanic rituals, hello, it is quite possible that that is what they are. I'm just saying, I'm just looking at the same thing you're looking at. I'm not drawing any conclusions. I'm just putting it out there. That's what it looks like. Why is it not that? So there's a bunch of examples, and we've talked about them already. Let's just hit a few of them, okay? Madonna, 2012, Indianapolis, the Super Bowl, the halftime show. She enters the stadium in an enormous procession. There's ancient Egypt, there's Rome, there's antiquity, there's all this. She's seated on a golden throne. She's pulled by an army. Her interest seems that she's kind of like vapid to the whole thing. She's a queen arriving in a ceremonial procession. She sings the song Vogue, then a little medley of a few other things. And then CeeLo Green shows up in a black robe with a large choir behind him, and they sing like a prayer. The stadium lit up with 1 million lights, and the words world peace show up in lights on the field. And the idea is that Madonna's goddess entrance, the winged, horned creatures, the costumes, all this religious imagery transforms a football field into a ceremonial space. And that the Egyptian goddess imagery, Isis, Illuminati, pagan symbolism, and all of that combines into a visual religious ceremony. That was the first time that people that were standing outside said, whoa, that looks like what's going on there. A giant audience version of it. The Super Bowl becomes part of it because it's such a mass ritual. Why? Attention. Look at how much attention it has. Then we have Katy Perry. She shows up February 1st, 2015, Super Bowl in Arizona. This is after her witch-themed Grammy performance. And she rides in on a giant golden mechanical lion. And she's performing the song Roar and then Dark Horse. Now, Dark Horse, that's like the horseman of the apocalypse, all of that symbolism. And I remember when that happened. I can't believe it was that long ago, 2015. But once again, they turned the football field into this giant black and white chessboard. So there's that symbolism. Katy Perry at the center, all these dancers around her. And it's much more visual production than it is music. Very, very interesting. This is the same artist that kind of has cultivated this witchcraft imagery, Egyptian thing, her little eye glitch, all that. Then we have Beyonce. This was Super Bowl 50, and Santa Clara, California. She performed the song Formation during the halftime show. The dancers all in black berets, black clothing, deliberately it's argued that they were meant to look like the Black Panthers. Illuminati and occult interpretations rapidly hit the streets. So her movements, the gestures, all of it dissected by researchers, and it's just filled with occult meaning. This is Beyonce, Jay-Z, Illuminati theories. A lot of it gets started here. And this is a case of Black Panther imagery, which was from the 60s, not necessarily secretly occult, but being used in a modern political, historical, racial imagery that we blend into this occult symbolism in a giant public ritual. Fascinating. So then we have Nicki Minaj, Los Angeles, 2012, the Grammys. Her performance there one of the clearest examples of a major award show deliberately staging a religious ritual, allegedly. She arrives at the ceremony accompanied by a man. He's dressed as the Pope. She performs a song called Roman Holiday. It's centered all around her alter ego, Roman Zelensky, which recalls Roman Polanski, the Manson murders, the Rosemary's Baby, all early occult Hollywood. This is paying homage to early Hollywood occultism. There's no doubt about it. The production includes a mock confession, monks, Catholic imagery, levitation, and even an exorcism. So this isn't hidden symbolism. The performance explicitly constructed around possession and exorcism. The Catholic League, once again, condemned it. Conspiracy people, they went nuts. The view of the production as a theater depicting an exorcism, people argue that it's actual ritual disguised as entertainment. So this is hard to refute these claims when you watch those performances. Then we come to another huge one. Sam Smith and Kim Petras performed the song Unholy at the Grammys in LA, February 2023. This is, you just got to see it. It's the devil, and he's performing a song called Unholy. That's it. He's got horns on his hat. Everything's red. There's fire. He's in a cage. The visual presentation, deliberately infernal. It looks like hell. It's supposed to. The performance immediately comes with accusations that the Grammys has gone satanic. This is a satanic ritual. It's on the stage. There's no denying it. It couldn't be more overt. It's also interesting that broadcast was sponsored by Pfizer, which was the pharmaceutical sort of company that was involved in the vaccine. This was 2023, so of course they had their billions from that. It's just weird that they would sponsor this. It's very interesting. So this is 2023, America's premier mainstream music broadcast, and it is 100% devil horns, fire, a song called Unholy, blood, and depiction of hell. Sponsored by Pfizer. You know, my job is done. I just report the evidence. I don't really have to do a lot here. It's crazy. Then we have Lil Nas X. This is Descending into Hell and his imagery. And we get into this whole rappers going satanic. It's a really weird thing. There's no reason to go into all that. That's a whole nother episode that I'm not going to do. Maybe someone else will. There's this Travis Scott, if you remember the Astro World tragedy where people died, they were crushed against the stage, but he just kept singing and egging them on. People say that was ritual sacrifice. That was Houston, Texas, 2021. I guess 10 people. Terrible. Doja Cat, she's an artist, if you don't know, singer. Her song or album called I'm Demonic becomes part of her brand. It's one of those things. This idea of hidden symbolism, that's long gone. They're front and center these days. So this whole thing of, the concert as that, predictive programming falls into this because they're telling you what they're going to do and they're going to do it. There's another word for that. What is it? It's revelation of the method. So here's another thing I want to also say. I know this is very, very long, but I do have an opinion on some of this, which is all magic and all witchcraft isn't necessarily bad. There's this idea in witchcraft, in true pagan witchcraft, that if you do something bad, it comes back on you threefold. So that tends to discourage a lot of people from doing negative witchcraft. So the idea is, and there's plenty of good that comes from witches. A lot of them were maligned because they were healers, and the church and modern medicine wants to marginalize them. So there's real powerful, good witchcraft in the world. Absolutely there is. There's also the negative side, and what happens is, because of this idea of everything you do comes back to you, that sort of stops a lot of people from being a negative witch, let's just say. So this idea of revelation of the method is that you can sort of dodge that karma if you tell people what you're going to do. And so that's why we get all this theatrical pomp and circumstance that looks like Satanism in Hollywood productions, because they're showing us, they're saying, look, we're going to do this, so fair warning, and they're trying to dodge the karma of their negative spells. Just my opinion, but an interesting way to look at it for sure. This brings us to what I'm going to call the end of this episode. Yay, and the fans cheered. So let me just say that I'm not going to go back and rehash all of this. The point is, Hollywood has this endless fascination with the occult. In the early days, it was sort of hidden. It kind of rose. It was subliminal. And now it's on the front page. So Hollywood's relationship with the occult is old, deep, considerably more complicated than celebrities covering up one eye and trying to be cute. Okay, we've gone through this very long story. We've gone through Aleister Crowley and his ceremonial magic, Jack Parsons, the Babylon Working, Kenneth Anger, Occult Cinema, Anton, LaVey, Church of Satan, brings us into Charlie Manson, music industry, heavy metal, satanic panic, and right up into modern celebrity symbolism and the enormous ritualistic spectacles on today's biggest stages. So that's what we see when we look at this with objective eyes. Somewhere along the way, occult symbolism and occultism in general stopped existing only at the margins, and it became associated with magical orders and esoteric books, yes, but it moved into the visual language of entertainment. So the history behind that is absolutely real. Crowley actually practiced ceremonial magic. He absolutely directly influenced artists and musicians. Jack Parsons, a real person. He helped build the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He helped start NASA. He was absolutely a founder of the Thelemic rituals and the workings of Aleister Crowley, and he conducted rituals and tried to conjure a goddess, and he believes that he did. Kenneth Anger deliberately incorporated occult ideas into his films. Arguably, his films are nothing more than films of him doing rituals, it could be said. And then on and on and on. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are part of the historical record. So from there, things start to get harder to separate. We have this danger, rebellion, forbidden knowledge, all that sells. Nothing sells more than stamping it like bad for you, right? That doesn't mean every symbol is that, but it does mean that all these occult symbols do belong to one enormous ecosystem. So the Bavarian Illuminati, a real thing. Bohemian Grove, yes, a real place. The whole thing, MK Ultra, really happened. Powerful people really do participate in secret organizations. I'm not making that up. It's a thing. So some entertainers seem to have studied or practiced these occult systems. And it seems like they're giving little shout outs back to the guys behind the curtain. That's what it seems like to me. We find more and more that history and what we see in our day-to-day unfolding is always connected. So Hollywood and the occult, maybe they were always going to find each other. Maybe they came up together and it's all been one sort of thing. And that's why it's so hard to separate it now. It sort of evolved hand in hand, Hollywood and the occult. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, in Druid tradition and in ancient pagan witchcraft, one of the most coveted trees to use the wood to make a wand from was the holly tree. So even the very word Hollywood is a reference to a witch's wand, because the holly wood is the most powerful of woods to use for a pagan witch to make a wand from. Boom. So we have this situation now where all of this symbolism leads and points toward transformation, hidden knowledge, pop stars with alternate identities, power, huge money, worlds that exist beyond ordinary experience. Once that relationship enters pop culture, it starts to self-perpetuate because they need that attention. They thrive on it. They're like vampires for it. So after everything we've covered, the interesting question is, Hollywood's fascination with the occult, is it real? The occultists were real. The beliefs were real. The rituals, the connections to entertainers we know are real. The influence that those ideas had on pop culture and continue to have, we know is real. So, is it a stretch to say that Hollywood has a connection to the occult and uses it on a day-to-day basis? Is it really a stretch? You know, it's amazing the documented history that you find. You can find all things Renegade Files at therenegadefiles.com. You know that. It's your one-stop shop for everything. Go grab some merchandise if you like the show. Go jump on the RFA agency on Patreon. It's our own secret society. You can become an RFA agent today. You can try it for free for a week, and you can see all the cool stuff that I've built for you there. So check it out, and I'll say hi, and give me a high five in there. All you got to do is go to therenegadefiles.com, and you can find everything you want there. Now, this has been a long one, and it's been big and it's been crazy, but I really appreciate you going through it with me. What do you think? It seems obvious. It's interesting to look at it. It's fun to tie the threads together, and it's cool for me because I'm that type of person. I love to go back through and see how the history connects it all the way through, because that gives it legitimacy. That gives it a foundation, and that foundation seems to be what has created what we see today. And you can call it what you want, but it looks to me like the occult side of Hollywood, rituals, hidden history, and dark magic, which was Renegade Files, episode 140, that you just took the time with me and went through the whole thing. Bam! We did it. We went through the rabbit hole and we survived to come out on the other end. Thank you so much for exploring the whole thing with me. Subscribe or follow this show right now so we can meet here next week and explore the deepest stories of covert culture, UFOs, aliens, cryptids, conspiracy theories, and unsolved mysteries. I am so glad to have you in the Renegade Files crew. Until our next adventure, I'm your host, Lex Gordon. Stay wild, curious child.